I'd like to talk about something that I think will help every single person watching right now. And it's a technique that I've been using consistently for the last year and a half and have seen very good results with. What it's called is the letting go technique, or the technique of surrender. Essentially what letting go is allowing any phenomenon that arises within your awareness to simply be as it is. In this sense, you're not labeling it or judging it. Whatever happens is allowed to be there. You aren't clinging to it and you aren't resisting it. There's no labeling, there's no categorizing, there's no deciding whether or not it's good or bad for you. You simply sit with whatever it is and allow it to be with no judgment whatsoever. These phenomenon that arise can include things and events or experiences that happen outside of yourself, or thoughts and emotions that occur within your own mind. So whatever phenomenon that happens, it is arising within your awareness and you're allowing it to be. I'm sure everybody watching can relate to this scenario. You are going about your day and something happens within your physical space, or you have a memory or a thought that triggers an emotional response. This emotional response doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be noticeable to anybody around you. The point is that you now are aware of an emotion. And something to note for later is that this emotion is within your awareness. You are the aware being that is now experiencing an emotion separate from that awareness. We'll talk about that later, but we all know what it's like to suddenly be triggered and suddenly have emotions arise within our awareness. There are three main ways in which we usually cope with emotions that suddenly arise that we are uncomfortable with. That is, we either repress the emotion, suppress the emotion, or express the emotion. Repression is when you unconsciously push out of your awareness an unwanted emotion. Suppression is when you consciously push away something that you don't want to experience, an unwanted emotion. And expression is, of course, when we cry because we are feeling grief, or we rage and yell because we're feeling anger. None of these mechanisms are actually healthy. Expression seems healthy. We live in a culture now where expressing yourself is very important to us. And if you're angry, you should allow yourself to be angry. And if you're sad, you should allow yourself to cry. To an extent, that's not bad, but only if utilized correctly. Expressing yourself, expressing these emotions usually leads to suppression or repression in the end. So what happens is you're overwhelmed by an emotion, and then once you express enough of that overwhelming emotion, what's left over, you end up suppressing or repressing anyways. And that's not healthy. These emotions, because they've accumulated and they're now beneath your conscious awareness, they never end up being truly released. And this causes a huge, almost backlog or reservoir of any given emotion within your subconscious. So every time that you are triggered to feel a certain emotion, it ends up releasing or opening up the reservoir, and you're now aware of all of that stuff. Your subconscious attempts to release everything that's been repressed or suppressed in the past through this triggering event. And that's why sometimes we can have extremely over-exaggerated reactions to something that really didn't warrant that much emotion. It's not because necessarily that thing is causing this much emotion, but because it's now triggered all of this subconscious, stale emotional energy that's been pushed down within the subconscious, and it wants to be released. It's attempting to release. But what we do is usually, again, we repeat the cycle of expressing and then repressing or suppressing, or repressing right away or suppressing right away. And because of the accumulation of these emotions beneath our conscious awareness, we end up molded by them. So you might develop habitual thought patterns or habitual behaviors that are due to these accumulated emotional energies within your subconscious. If you have a lot of suppressed or repressed anger, you're going to be an angry person. You're going to have angry thoughts and you're going to act angry in your daily life. If you have a lot of grief that's beneath your conscious awareness, you're going to have a lot of sad thoughts and you're going to be a very sad person in behavior throughout your day-to-day life. And this is true for any base emotion that can be pushed down within the subconscious. So you can see why finding a proper mechanism or technique for allowing these emotions to come up from the subconscious and be released is so very important for all of us. And on top of that, actually deal with emotions in a proper and productive way when they do arise, so that even if you didn't have anything, say, in your subconscious, when you do get triggered by something and have an emotional response to something, you let it go and allow it to release fully so that it doesn't end up being pushed down out of your conscious awareness. So now let's get into how to actually use the letting go technique. Essentially, what you're doing is when something happens, you're disengaging completely from the thing that's happening, any thoughts that arise due to the thing that's happening, and especially any emotions that are triggered by the event. Practically speaking, it means mentally stepping back from whatever is happening and just simply witnessing it all unfold. You aren't judging it or labeling it. You aren't allowing yourself to go on thought tangents or ruminate on any emotions that come up. You're simply allowing it to be as it is and witnessing it unfold. That might sound vague or abstract and hard to conceptualize in an actual practice, but I'm going to try and give some analogies that might help you visualize or understand the process a little bit better. So letting go is like realizing you've been clenching your fist around an emotion or an experience or a thought, and then deciding to unclench that fist. It's like deciding to sit down with your emotions for a cup of tea and enjoy their company. You might not like the emotion of fear. You might not like the emotion of grief, but if you decide to invite it in, to sit down with your emotion and allow it to be in your space, you will see massive improvements in your mood. Because what happens with the letting go technique is as you allow, instead of resist or push away emotions, you are releasing it. And eventually there's no more left to release. And what's left behind is a spaciousness, a joy, a bliss that you didn't know was possible because you'd always been repressing or suppressing emotions. So there's always this background hum of the things that you've never allowed to actually be released. Just because something makes us feel uncomfortable doesn't mean that we can't handle it. And it also doesn't mean that we can't allow it to be within our awareness, within our presence. You'll see that fear is not as bad as you think it is. Anger is not as volatile and as strong as it feels in the moment. And grief is really not as painful as you think it is. It's our resistance to these emotions that give them such power. And when we begin to let go and allow their presence within our awareness, the power they have that we've given them begins to diminish. And we find it quite easy after some practice to actually just allow and sit with these emotions that previously seemed very difficult to deal with, that previously we might have repressed or suppressed. And now we can actually allow them to truly release, and they will no longer dictate how we behave or think in the future. So let's give a practical example of utilizing the letting go technique for something that might happen in your daily life. Let's say that you have a public speaking event to do in a week. You have to write a speech and give this speech in front of 100 people. Most people would be very terrified of doing this speech, and they're going to feel a lot of fear. So what we want to do with the letting go technique here is stop ourselves from going through the usual habits of dealing with this fear. You might express this fear by venting to other people. You might express it through panic attacks if it's bad enough, or anything in between. You might suppress it by trying to avoid thinking about the speech or even preparing for the speech because you're just too afraid to face this event. You might unconsciously repress a lot of the fear related to public speaking, and it will suddenly be triggered by some later event. What we're going to do instead is notice that fear is now within our awareness, and we're going to discard all labels that we have regarding fear. We're going to even forget that we know the word fear. We're going to discard any attempt to judge this emotion or categorize it in any other framework that we have based around the emotion of fear. We're going to forget everything we think we know, and we're just going to allow it to be present within our awareness. Some things you can ask yourself in order to facilitate this is, what does this feel like? If I didn't know what fear was, and it was the first time I've ever felt it, let's describe what it is in very basic terms. Naturally, you might start with something to describe the physical sensation. You might say you feel sick to the stomach. Maybe there's tension in your chest or shoulders. Maybe you're shaky and sweaty. When you reduce it down to just physical symptoms, it's really not as scary as it was when it was this overwhelming concept that you've built up in your head with this system of different labels and concepts related to it and all these other memories you've had of being afraid. When it's just the physical symptoms, it's really not that bad. It's just a set of physical symptoms. You've dealt with nausea before. You've sweat before. You've shaken before or stuttered. It automatically becomes less scary, less of a big deal. So now, that's not quite letting go yet. That's just the first step to get into the letting go technique. What you're going to do next is continue to let go of every label or categorization. So even now that you've gone down to the physical level, let go of those too. What is nausea? What is tightness? What is tension? What is stuttering or sweating? They're just phenomenon. They're just things that are appearing within your awareness. They're appearing to your mind and you're witnessing them. Let's focus on that witnessing aspect. I said earlier that a key concept here is that an emotion is present within your awareness. You are the aware being experiencing the emotion. You are just experiencing these phenomenon. If you allow those phenomenon to be present, not judging them, not labeling them, you realize, if you stay focused and you give it a real attempt, that it's really not as bad as you thought. And you don't have to run from it. What you're doing effectively with letting go is letting go of every preconceived notion that you had about the fear in this scenario. You're letting go of, let's say, every grudge you've had towards fear. It's this big thing. You've felt fear many times in your life and it's caused so much grief. Imagine burying the hatchet with fear. Imagine forgiving fear. And that is actually a portion of letting go. Forgiving is letting go, is surrender. When you forgive someone, what are you doing? You're forgiving everything that's ever been done to you by this person that you thought was wrong. You're letting it all go. You're accepting that it's happened and you're relinquishing that clinging that you've had with these events in your life that may have, caused you harm. It's the same thing with fear. What you're doing is you're letting go of everything that you feel about fear and fear itself. So now that you've done all of that work, what you're going to notice is it's actually quite simple to just sit with it. And as you do that, you'll notice the fear eventually just relinquishes. It's just gone. It will just diminish. There will be, maybe you might feel a sort of a crescendo in the fear. There'll be a moment where it feels really intense and then suddenly it's gone. It just dissipates and you are overwhelmed with relief because what that represented to you was a huge store of subconscious fear energy. An analogy that I like to use is like there is a reservoir within your subconscious that you aren't aware of. And each reservoir contains different amounts of different emotions. And you are a channel, a pipe, so to speak. You're only aware of the pipe. You aren't aware of the reservoir. So when a valve is opened in one of these reservoirs and it begins to flow through the pipe, something triggered the valve to open, you are just going to allow it to flow. You're not going to try and close that valve. You're not going to push against the water. You're not going to resist that water, that emotional water. You're just going to allow it channel through you. And eventually it will stop. You don't know when it will or how long that reservoir will take to actually empty, but it will. Just have faith, trust that it will. And try this with little things. Give it a shot. When you next are triggered to have an emotion, just try letting go until you feel that relief. Even if you don't feel that relief, you are doing work. There is no wasted work when it comes to this stuff. When it comes to letting go, any amount that you do is positive. Any amount that you do is working towards that relief feeling. So essentially what happens is you're like depleting that reservoir. You don't know how full it is, but you are depleting it. So you might have taken a reservoir that was full and brought it down to half, and you aren't aware of it. But next time you are triggered to feel this emotion and you work on it, it'll take just as much time and suddenly it's gone. Or maybe you have less time and maybe half the time it'll be gone. And you won't have to deal with such an intense iteration of that emotion anymore. It's not to say that emotion isn't around. It's not to say that you won't be triggered any longer to feel that emotion, but it will no longer be as intense for you. So I hope this helps. Thank you so much for watching. I know that it was a long video, but it's something that I really think is important for everybody in today's society. And no matter how old you are, no matter what practices you might have, please give this a shot. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Peace.